Welcome back, and in this lesson I'm going to show you even more that you can do with the DOM. So previously we saw all of the wonderful information that's contained within the DOM. We can also write to the document, so we can do something like this, and this actually is one of the methods that's available within the DOM. So we saw that when we output all of this information, they're not all values. Some of them are actually more objects, so they're deeper objects, and then we could traverse through them and get the values. And then we also had some methods here. So these ones here, they're not exactly, they're not going to return back a value because these are connected to methods. So we also have the ability to write to the document, and this is one of the ones that is available within the document object, where we specify document write, and then within the parentheses we type out whatever string value that we want it to write out. So this way we can actually write into our HTML page, and we notice that whenever I click over this particular element, it's visible now within the source code of the element, but it's actually not directly built into our source code. So we see that once the browser renders this out, it reads through the JavaScript and it adds this particular string value, which is located just underneath the script tags, because we're typing it within the script tag. So it just simply adds it in the next available slot within the web page, and that's just after the script tags. So that's why the hello world is just falling there, and it actually gets displayed out to the user. So we are able to communicate to the user via the DOM and output content that's actually visible from our JavaScript to the web users. And immediately there is a downside to document write, and we notice that if, for instance, I wanted to type some content within this div, I'd have to recreate the script tags, and then I'd have to enter in the document write within there. And really, this isn't really an efficient way to do that. So it does actually work, but it's not the best way to do that. So there is another solution, and that's using some of the built-in methods that are already available, pre-programmed, ready to go using the document object. So we know that the document, it builds out all of the information that's contained within the web page, and we also know that all of this information is then stored and it's accessible via our JavaScript. So if, for instance, we want to output hello world between these divs, we also do want to keep our script separated from our HTML, so that's bad practice. So we need a way to identify the element where we want to output that content into. So let's create an element, we'll give it an ID, and using the IDs is one of the most basic ways of selecting elements. And this is the next step where we need to select that element. So we need to be able to identify the element, and that's where we added in the ID. So we know that if we had a whole bunch of elements here, then we can pick this one up, and this is the one that we want to place and make use of within our JavaScript. So let's make that connection, and instead of document write, I'm going to say, actually I probably need to change quite a bit of this. So we're going to do document, and the method is going to be get element by ID. So it's get capital E element by ID, and then within the string ID we need to indicate what the ID is that we're grabbing. We don't need to create a hash here because this is already an ID. So the JavaScript method is already expecting an ID, so it knows to look for within your HTML code the element that has the ID of output. And if you try to specify one that's not within your HTML elements, then it's going to throw an error because it's not going to be able to find it. So it knows within this syntax that it has to go and look for this particular input, and then we know that we're actually placing this within our JavaScript and connecting it. So what's our next step? We saw earlier that we can set up a variable, and within that variable it can contain information, and it can also contain the object information. So we know that this element is going to have a whole bunch of information attached to it. So it's not just that we've got that one element. So let me refresh the page and let's take a closer look at that div. When we go down and we dig down deep, we know that this div has a whole bunch of information, and it also has, it's got a lot of separate smaller nodes that are also attached to it. So everything within the DOM is considered a node, but we also have nodes that are in other nodes and so on. So we need to really be able to pull back, and when we're specifying the ID, we're grabbing this entire object. So let's place this within an object value. So we'll just call this, we'll call it output, so that we know that the output object is tied to the output ID. You don't have to call it the same, it can be called differently. So this is just for the instances of this demonstration, we're calling it output because we've got a variable named output and an ID named output. So let's go back out and let's refresh the page, and now let's see what value is contained within output. So we see when we select it, we get that the HTML element being returned back. So let's try something different. Let's do console log, and we saw that directory previously it output our content, our DOM information in a more of an object structured format that's readable. And this is the same case when we've selected this output as an object. We've got all of the information that's contained within it. And we see that now we can make use of it because now we've brought it into our JavaScript code. And we see that there's a lot of the same types of values, and the one that I want to look at in particular for this lesson is this one here, the inner text or inner HTML. So now that we've selected it and we've put output into an object, we can make use of that object and we can specify, just as we did with other objects, where we specify a value. So if this one contained a value right off the bat, it would be within that inner HTML. So we saw with objects that we can actually overwrite the value. So let's overwrite hello with world and we'll see what happens. So I'll go back out and refresh the page, and we see that initially within our source code, output has a value of hello within it, but we've actually grabbed that element and we've updated the value of inner HTML and we've set it up as world. And with HTML, that basically means that it actually accepts HTML. So let's refresh that again, and we can write HTML content within our elements. And there was another one as well that was called inner text. So let me show you what the difference is. And if we try to write this now as inner text, you can see that when I refresh it, it's actually going to take those HTML tags and it's going to simply output it as text. So what I want you to do now is to pause the video, open up your editor, and let's write some HTML code. So create a simple div here. You can call it output as well, and update the contents of output to say JavaScript output. So what I want you to do now is pause the video, and this is where the challenge comes in. Open up your editor and create a simple div, give it an ID, for instance, output, and then update the content. So start out with some blank content here and say within your JavaScript. So all you're going to have is a simple blank HTML element, and using JavaScript, grab that element and add within that element, welcome to my page, using JavaScript. So only use JavaScript to accomplish this. And I'll show you how easy that is to do. And I hope you had an opportunity to give it a go, try it out for yourself. And now let me show you what the solution is. So I already had that output document get element by ID, but I'm going to actually shorten this because I don't need to put it in a variable, and I can simply do it by document get element by ID, and then I can specify that inner HTML. It can be inner text as well, so both of them would be correct. and we want to write out a message. So welcome to my page, and then close off that statement. And then the rest of this, we're just going to simply remove out. Go back out, refresh your browser, and there you go. So it's as easy as that to create those interactions within the content of your HTML page. And in the next lesson, I'm going to show you even more that you can do using the DOM. Welcome back, and in this lesson, let's have some fun with what we've learned previously, how we can manipulate, how we can grab information that's available on a web page and update it. So it actually doesn't even have to be our own web pages, and of course, because the DOM is created within the rendering of the web page source code, whenever we refresh it, it's going to go away. So you're not actually going to be going in and updating anybody's website, but this is going to be a quick trick in order to access information contained within the website and actually make some updates to it. So let's go and open up a browser. So this can be any web page you want. It can be even the one that you're on right now watching the video. So all you have to do is find an element that's got an ID. And let's say, for instance, under Chrome DevTools, we can do an inspect on Open DevTools, and we can see that this particular element is called ID, has an ID of open. So let's open up the console, set up a variable, and I'm going to do just a variable A, and let's do document. So document, and do that get element by ID, and then the ID is called open. So select that element, and we're going to place it within A. So you see that if I take a look, I've actually grabbed that, and that information is being contained within the A value. So let's take a look and see what's contained within inner text there. And we can see that we've grabbed that element properly. We've got Open DevTools, and now we know that just as we did before, we can actually update that inner text. So let's do something like this, hello world, and update it, and we see that what happens now is that for this instance of this particular web page, even though it's on a different server, I don't really have access to the source code, I can manipulate it because this is an instance of it, and I've got all of that access to what's happening within the DOM. So I can select any number of elements and make updates to them simply by just grabbing them within the DOM within the web page. So now what I want you to do is pause the video, open up your browser, and you can go to any page you like, look through the source code, find one that has an ID, and update some of the text that's available within the web page. And you might have to spend a little bit of time trying to find ones that actually have IDs, so maybe they don't all have IDs. So in this particular case, I can see that I've got another one, device mode, discover DevTools. So it doesn't have to be this web page, but just make sure that you're able to actually identify those elements. And later on in the course, I'm going to show you other ways of making those selections and being able to select those elements. So even if it doesn't have an ID, there's ways to select it, and that's going to be coming up in the latter part of the course. So for now, open up your browser if it's not open already, or open up a new tab. Go to your favorite web page and take a look at the source code, grab an element that has an ID, and update the inner HTML or the inner text of it. You can even have some fun with updating the HTML. So try it out for yourself, and I'm going to do one more coming up as well. So I hope you had an opportunity to try this out for yourself, and it is really good practice getting familiar and making those selections. So I'm going to just grab another one that I've got here. So this one's called device-mode. So let's set up a variable, and you don't actually need to set up a variable. So maybe what I wanted to do is maybe I want to just make this update to it just right away. So it's get element by ID. And I believe it was called device, and I do need to go back, so it was device mode. And now let's just set the inner HTML of this particular object. So let's change this to an H1, and big words are new or now. So whatever message you want to put in there, and of course you can have some fun with this. So what I'm going to change is I'm going to change this value as soon as I hit enter, and it's going to update that value. So there we go. So we've updated the HTML here, and we've rewritten our own words into it. So the good thing about when you select it within a variable, and this is obviously the advantages of variables, is that you can make updates to it as you need to. So this time, what I want to do is I actually want to update the inner text of that element to equal the title of the web page. And remember from before, this information is contained within the document object, so we have access to all of that information. So pause the video and try it out for yourself. You can either put the value of the document title into a variable and then place it within your inner text, or you could just do it within one big statement like this one over here, or you can place the element within a variable and then attach that value. So there's a number of ways to do this, and since I've already got the value of this particular element already within an object A, I'm going to just simply update that inner text. So that syntax, in order to grab document, it was simply document title. So now when I press enter, we see that we're updating this value with information contained within the document object. So this is important because we can see that we can connect information, we can update information on our page, we can pull back information from the document object. So there is a lot you can do with it, and this really does open up the door to creating interactive and dynamic web page content, and this is what JavaScript is all about. So now we're able to actually update our content and pull back information about the web page. So there's one other part that I want to show you about the DOM, and that's how we can get form values. So this is going to be another important part of getting information from our web page and creating that interaction from our web users. So that's coming up in the next lesson. Welcome, and in this lesson I'm going to show you even more you can do with the DOM. So we saw earlier how we can output content, and this lesson I'm going to show you how you can get content that's input dynamically and then make use of it within your JavaScript. So for this we need an input field. So this is just a regular text input, and we need to give it an ID, and this is going to be our way to identify this input area. And I'm going to give this one an ID of VAL so that we can use this as a value and get the user to actually add some information within this value. So that's it, and now let's refresh the page, and we can see that we've got this input area and we can type in content in here. So let's see how we can actually grab the contents of that input. So I'm going to set up a variable, and I'm just going to call it A, and let's do the document. So document and get element by ID, and in this case we called it VAL. So let's grab it within that type of format. So we can do A, and we can see that this input has a value associated with it because we've typed something in there and it's not showing up within the input. Let's log it out. So let's log out the directory of A so we can take a closer look at what's actually contained within this object. So we see that we've got inner text and inner HTML, but it's actually still there's no values in there because we don't actually have any inner text or inner HTML for this particular type of element. We can see that the node is an input, so we can utilize that as well. So if we want to find out if it's an input, we can always type in A, and we can see we can do node type, and we saw that returns a 1, and I believe the other one was node name. So let's take a look and we'll see what type of element that is. So this is an input element. So let's see what else is contained within here. And we see that there's quite a bit of information. So we see that we've got our client width, we've got our client height. So let's take a look at those as well. And let's do a client height. And let's enter in a new value to it. So let's do something bigger. And we can see that we can set it to 50, but it doesn't adjust because this is a value that's already preset within there. So let's open that back up and let's scroll all the way down to the bottom, and we see that this is the one that we actually want to take a look at because we've got a value here called test. And we can also see that when we update it, and we need to actually print that value again and again. So let's just clear that out and let's do a value, and we can see that now that value has updated. So if we update it again, if I do a value, we can see that we've got the new content that's already in there. So this is how we can utilize it, and we can now, if I do it again, we're going to see that we've got hello world. So just as we're setting the value, we can also update the value as well. So let's do updated. And you can see that using JavaScript, I can actually update the contents of that input field. So this is giving us a lot of power and a lot of things that we can do within our script. So let's try to pull that out now within our script, and the challenge for this lesson is to open up your editor, create a div, give it an ID of output, create an input, give it an ID of VAL, and then using a script, update the content that's available within your div. So the challenge for this lesson is open up your editor, create two elements. One should be a div and the other one an input. And within the div, type in some text. So just do hello world. And what I want you to do within your script is to grab the contents of the div with the ID of output and place the value into the input field. So go ahead, pause the video, and I'll show you the solution coming up. So you need to have your editor for this one. So go ahead, open up your editor and try it out. And I hope you had the opportunity to give it a shot. So let me show you the solution for this. And just as previously, there's a number of ways to do this. You could do this all within one statement, but I'm going to use some variables, and I'm just going to grab the elements separately using the variables, and then I'm going to make the update from the content that's contained within the variables. So document get element by ID. So get element by ID, and now we need to specify our element. So that one is output. So we're going to place that one in output. And now, because I've already created one, I can grab the other one, and this one is going to be VAL. So just create VAL, and it's got an ID of VAL. So now the next statement is the actual updating part of it. So we know that we've got VAL, and this one is value. So we can equal it to output and inner. So just use inner HTML. And now let's try this out, refresh the page, and we see that hello world is written up there, and we've grabbed that element, inner HTML, and we've placed it within our form. So one of the things that's important to note here, and we are going to look at this in the upcoming lessons when it comes to functions. So the reason that we didn't do it the other way around, where we can actually input some information and then have our HTML update, is that we need to have a function, because at the point of load, unless we've got some content in there, we can do it then as we can grab the content when the web page builds out, but we need a way to actually run that code at a given point in time. So that's going to be covered when we look at functions, and that's coming up in the latter part of the course as well. So coming up in the next lesson, I'm going to show you even more that we can do with the DOM, and we're going to create some more interaction using a user input, the prompt, and then outputting that content that we're picking up and placing it within our HTML code. So that's coming up in the next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to take what we learned and update some content dynamically using JavaScript as we get an input from the user. So what we need to do is create a pop-up prompt asking for the user's name, and then update this div here with the ID of output to have a welcome message and include the user's name. So what I want you to do now, pause the video, open up your editor, and try it out for yourself. And I'm going to show you the solution coming up. So I hope you had the opportunity to try it out. And we saw earlier when we could get the user name and we could utilize prompt. So this was a built-in method that's ready to go within JavaScript. And what it does is it has this pop-up message, and we can put whatever string we wanted in there. So we can say something like, what is your name, with a question mark. And we know that username now will capture whatever the user's response was to our question. So we should be able to pick up the user's name. And so the next part of this challenge was actually to update that output with the brand new username and user information. So let's do the next step, and we're going to set up output, and we're going to equal that to document and use get element by ID. Grab that output element. I'll just place it in the object for now, and then what I'm going to do next is I'm going to update that inner text, and I'm going to equal it to the username. So let's try this out. So refresh the page. What is your name? So type in a name, hit OK, and we see that that content now gets dynamically created. So we need to just finish up and update the rest of our welcome message. So this can be just regular string. So welcome to my page, and then we'll comma separate it and concatenate that together. So refresh it, and whatever name or input the user places there, now we can see it being generated and output within our HTML. So now what I want you to do as well is to go ahead, try it out for yourself, update some of the messages, update some of the output information, and we are going to be revisiting the DOM in more detail within a latter part of this course. But for now, take what you've learned in the previous lessons, try it out for yourself, and get familiar with using the DOM and getting the DOM information within your JavaScript. And we're going to have a lot more examples coming up. Are you ready for logic statements in JavaScript? This is where logic allows you to make decisions within your code. You can apply logic and take the next step and allow that code to determine what's going to get rendered out. So which block of code gets rendered out next. And in this section, we're going to look at the ternary operator. So we've seen this before earlier, and we're going to go into more detail how it works and how you can apply it within your JavaScript in order to start applying logic. So basically, it allows you to ask a question and see if the condition is true or false. If it's true, then apply one value. If it's false, then apply that other value. So it allows you to apply two different sets of values to a condition, and we can basically check to see if something is true or false and then have a result depending on that. There's our very quick short format in order to do conditional checks and apply that logic, and that's what ternary operators are all about. They allow you that really easy shorthand method to apply some quick logic and get a response. There's also the if statement. So the if statement allows you to really build out that logic and execute a block of code depending on what the result of that logic is. And logic is really important when it comes to programming, because this is what programming is all about, making those decisions and rendering out code depending on what the outcome is of that decision. There's also the if-else statement. So else provides you an alternative ending to your condition. So if it's true, it's going to do something, and else provides you that opportunity to do something else. And then there's the else if, so you can ask another condition, see if that one is true, and then you could ask as many else ifs as you want until you run out of else ifs, and then you end up with the else. So basically, it allows you to ask to apply, check if a bunch of conditions are true, and if they're not true, then you can do something and render that out within your JavaScript. And there's a lot of power behind what you can do with conditional statements. We're also going to look at the switch statement. So the switch statement is an alternative. Instead of writing a bunch of if-elses, you can write the switch statement, which gives you the ability to ask and see if a case is true. And if it's true, then you execute a block of code, and you can go down the row, have a number of different cases that you can compare, and you can see if they come out true. And just like the if-else statement, you can apply alternative if none of the cases are true. So this is great for creating different applications, and you can apply these different conditional statements depending on the application you're building. And I'm going to show you two really good examples of what you can build using a simple conditional statement. So if we have a coin toss, we throw a coin up in the air, it's going to land either heads or tails. And this is comparable to Boolean. So it's either true or false. It can't be anything else, and it's going to turn out to be one of those values. And we're going to be building out a coin toss simulation within this section as well, in order to simulate tossing a coin and getting a returned value. So something is going to happen, and we're going to either end up with heads or tails in this application. Then there's also another exercise in this course, and we've packed it full of all kinds of exercises so that you can see the code in action. And we're going to show you how to build a magic 8-ball. It's going to be able to answer your questions, and it's up to you to determine how JavaScript knows what you're thinking within the magic 8-ball. We're going to be building this application from scratch, and this is where we're going to show you how the switch statement works and how you can apply switch statements within your coding to really make things happen. Both of these exercises are designed to get you coding, to apply that coding that we're showing you within the lesson. So do try it out and do practice. Work alongside the lessons in order to build out these applications and get familiar with logic statements, because they're super important building block to coding. And it's going to become really important in the latter part of the course as we build out more complex applications. Welcome back, and in this lesson we're going to be looking at the ternary operator. So basically we saw that it allows us to apply a condition, evaluate the condition, and depending on what the condition is, we can see that it evaluates to true or false, and we're able to assign value to it. So let's output our content into the ID here, the element with the ID output. So I'm going to set up a variable first, calling it output, and we'll do document, and we'll grab that element by doing document get element by ID. And then now we just need to identify the element that we wanted to grab, and we can identify it with the ID of output. Next, let's set up another variable, and we'll call it login. So for now, let's set login to false, and this is the one that we're going to switch to either true or false. And then I'll show you how we can create that output and update the content here within our output element. So next, let's do output, and this one we're just going to hold a value. So basically it's going to be our HTML value for output, and for now let's just leave this blank. So this is where we're going to use our ternary operator, and we're going to set another variable with the ternary operator, and we're going to check to see if the user is okay, and we're evaluating the value of login. So with the conditional ternary operator, there's one condition and then two expressions. So these are all, you need to include all three of these in order to make it work properly. So let's take login, and we can do if login equals true. And we know that we saw earlier when we were evaluating conditions that we can really simplify this, and we can simply check to see if login is true. So this is going to be the same thing. We can remove out the two equal signs true. Maybe we'll leave it in here for now, and then I'll show you that exact same thing, and we'll remove it back out. So next we include the question mark, and the question mark ends the condition. So JavaScript reading this will know that this is the condition, and we've got a question mark. So basically the first expression is going to be true, and I'm going to update output, the value for output holder, and okay, or we could just say true for now, and then we can update those values later on. So we'll just output true, and otherwise we're going to create a value for output holder, and let's set it to false. And these they don't have to be true or false because these are string values. We've got the quotes around them, so they are different from the Boolean value. We've got login coming in. And then next and lastly, let's update our inner HTML. So we'll do output and inner HTML, and we're going to update this to whatever value is contained within the variable of user okay. So let's go ahead, refresh it, and try it out, and we see that we get false. And if I update this, we can see that it should be true, and it is true. So basically, this is how the conditional operators work, is they give us the ability to actually evaluate something, and basically if a choice needs to be made, then we can make that choice and spit back and output a response back to that choice by making that condition. So the other thing with ternary operators, we don't actually need to set it as a variable. Now I know earlier we've been setting them all as variables, but we don't even need to do that. We can take some type of action, we can have an alert or something else pop up. So there's a number of different options for us in this case as well. So let's try one of those as an example where we're not going to use the user okay, and we're just going to simply evaluate it and do the response back for it directly within the expression. And that's this part over here. So let's do the condition. So do login, and remember again, we don't need to have the two equal signs true. So this will check this anyway. So we can really simplify the code by removing those out. So let's take a look, and we'll see if login, and then we'll do the question mark. And basically here is where we can update and change our content or our output. So we did say that we wanted to launch an alert, and I'll just say okay this time. And we separate it with the colon, and otherwise we're going to go alert, and we'll do denied. So let's see how this works. So we'll refresh it, and we see that it's okay, and we can click it, and then over here, let's update this to false, and we see it's denied. So what I want you to do now is pause the video and create a prompt asking for the user's input whether their name is one of the ones that we've got and we're equaling to. And so what I want you to do now is pause the video and create an array of a bunch of usernames. So create an array of usernames. Create a prompt asking for a username, and then check to see if the username is within the array, and if it is, then we output OK within the output area, and if it's not, then we say that it's denied. And this has to go into this element, the output element, and I'll give you a hint. Use index of when you're doing your ternary operator and check to see if there's a value within that array, so that way you can see that if this value is sitting within that array. Username, and this one is a prompt. So go ahead, pause the video, and I'm going to show you the solution coming up. So I hope you had an opportunity to try that out. So we had a number of steps that we wanted to take within this exercise, and the first one is to create an array. So we'll just create an array and we'll call it user names. And then within here, we need to populate some values. So we'll do Mike and we'll do John. And we can add in as many usernames as we want. So I'm going to keep it at 2 for now, but we know, or maybe I'll add in one more. I'll do something like Larry. So we've got 3 usernames in there. So now what we want to do is make a check and evaluate if those usernames are valid usernames within the array. So I'm going to refresh this page, and I'm going to open up the console, and just to make sure that we do have usernames here. So we do have them in here. And remember earlier when we were using index of, and we need to specify the array. So we can say index of, and we can check to see if the value is in there. So let's add in a value. We'll do Mike. And that actually should be user names. So if the value is in there, then it's going to return back the value of where Mike is located. So the index value of where Mike is located. So we can do the same thing for the other usernames. So just got to make sure that we are grabbing the right case. And we see that uppercase Larry is not there, but lowercase Larry will be there. So always be careful about those cases. And we can see that when we tried to find one that actually wasn't in the array, then it returned back the -1. So this is what we can use within our operator. So let's do that. Check user. And here's where we're going to apply our usernames. So just as we did here within the console, so index of. And then now let's put in that username. So try out Mike for now. And it's always a good way to try things out first. And if this comes back, so we actually need to apply a condition. So we need to check to see if it's greater than -1. So that means that the user is there. And we can return back a value of true. Otherwise, let's do false. So basically, we've got our condition here, and we can see that if Mike is in there, then user check evaluates to true. Otherwise, it's going to evaluate to false. So let's try that out, and I'm actually going to comment out these alerts. Go back out and refresh it. And now let's see what check user evaluates to, and we see that it is true. So now we can use that and we can update our output. So let's keep this one in here. So the output value, going to keep it within our code so that we can grab back that output. We don't need some of the other statements here. And last part of the exercise was to output it into the output HTML. So I'm going to just do it like this. And then here is where I'm going to use my ternary operator, and I'm going to check to see if this one is true. And of course, I could have saved myself maybe some trouble by just bringing this one into the username. So let's do it this way first so that we get even more practice with the ternary operators, and then we're going to remove that and simplify the code. And I still need to add in one more value there. So before I actually check to see, I need to find out who it is. So user input, and then this is where I'm going to use the prompt, and I'm going to ask, what is your name? And update this to check for the user input in here, and then also over here, so I can do something like welcome, and otherwise we'll do denied. So this value will be denied or welcome, and then let's add to the inner HTML the username. So we're going to add to it, and we'll comma separate that, concatenate it together with the input. And the rest of this stuff here we can actually get rid of. So now let's try out our code. So refresh the page. What is your name? So I'm going to type in Mike for now, and then we get welcome Mike. If I type in a name that nobody, we hit and we see denied. So as I said, we can actually simplify this, that we can get rid of one of these ternary statements where we could go directly and have the message here. So let me show you how to do that, and let's simplify the code. So do you know how we can simplify the code? So basically we can just do welcome or denied, and we can get rid of this line altogether because we're not going to be using that variable, so we have no need to set it. And let's refresh it, and we'll try it out just to make sure everything is working. Refresh it again. So that was my misspelling of Mike, and this time welcome Mike. So in the next lesson, I'm going to show you the ternary operator, and we're going to get introduced to the if conditional statement. Welcome back, and earlier we saw the ternary operator, and we saw how we can apply a condition and then return back an expression depending on what this condition evaluates to. So whether it's true, we return back the first item. The second one gets returned if it's false. So what happens if you actually want to have this condition, but you want something to happen? Maybe you want an alert to happen. So you can enclose them within the rounded brackets. And actually, no, we don't want to enclose that one, the whole thing. So I want to wrap that one, and then I can wrap this one. And then I'm going to move this one over to here. So basically, if we do it this way, we can see that when I enter it in, everything is still working the same way. So I also have the ability to add in something like if I wanted an alert, and this alert will say hello. So nice welcoming message. And then what we need to do, if we want to have multiple operations happening, we can comma separate it, and basically what's going to happen now is that the last expression is going to be the one that's actually going to get taken. So if we reverse this order, or if we just leave hello, we're actually going to get a problem here. So even though it will say hello, we're going to get undefined. So the way to bring that defined back is to comma separate it. So now when I refresh it and I type in Mike, it says hello, and it goes back to welcome Mike. So we can do the same thing for denied, and there is a problem here if we do want to have more things happen. We want to assign different variables and different values. We can link them together with the comma, and as long as at the end we're actually returning back a value, then we're always going to get some type of input here within that inner HTML. So ideally, this isn't the best way to present it. It's really good if you want to have a really short format, for the if statement. But if you want something longer, then that's where we use the if statement. So what I want to do now is I'm going to rewrite what we've got up here, and I'm going to place it within an if statement, and then we'll do a quick comparison. So basically the if statement allows us to once again evaluate a condition, and if the condition is true, then it will run what's being set within that first expression. So we'll do our same condition here, and let's go down to over here, and I'm going to set login. So we're going to use that same login that we had before. So we'll do login true, and this is what we're going to do to start out. I'm going to comment out this prompt. I'm going to get rid of this stuff here as well. So basically it won't ask us the name. It'll just come back denied because we're not going to have a value for that user input. So it's going to come back denied. And I should declare that variable because otherwise I'm going to get an error there. So user input, and I'm just going to leave user input as blank. So next, let's go down to here, and we're going to put login. And we saw earlier that login, just by using login on its own, we can do the same thing as we did with equal true. So now we've got the curly brackets, and then within the curly brackets, we can do something. So let's update our inner welcome. It was true. So do something like that. So now when we refresh it, we see get welcome, it was true. Because what's happened now is that this if statement got executed, checked the condition of login, and we know that login is true because we've set it to true just up here. So it sees if the specific condition is truthy, and if it is, then it executes this content. So what happens if it's not true? So we have an option, and that's really the nice thing about these if statements, that we also have the option. So sometimes you'll find that programmers will just use the if statement by itself, and they're not going to have something happening if this isn't true. But we do have an option, and that's where else comes in. So else gives us the ability to output something if that particular condition is not true. And I'm going to get rid of this, and I'm going to say denied. And we'll do was not true. And we'll update this to be false. Go back out, refresh it, and we get denied was not true. So how do we take what we did within the ternary operator and apply it within a conditional statement, an if statement? So what I want you to do now, pause the video and get rid of what we did up here for the ternary statement and create those outputs here within this type of format within the if statement. So I hope you had an opportunity to try this out. So let's update our code, and we've got the user input. We're asking for the prompt, so we do need that. We don't need that one anymore. We still need to grab the element within the output. And here is where we've got our condition. So just like what we did in the ternary operator, we've got our condition over here right in the beginning of the if statement. And the other thing that we did is that we had multiple expressions here. So let's update this, and now we can clean this up a little bit as well. So we've got that output, and then we also had the denied, and then we just did a comma separation with the user input. So let's just add that to the end here, and I'll add that to the end here. And now I'm going to get rid of this stuff up here, and I can also get rid of the login. So now let's try it out and see if it actually works the same way. So save, refresh, and first let's enter in a name that's there, and we see it's hello, welcome, it was true, Mike. So next let's enter in a name. We'll enter in nobody, and we get denied, was not true, nobody. And there's really a great advantage to doing it this way, because you see you've got an opportunity to set multiple values. So even though the ternary operator is a lot shorter, if you're looking to apply quite a bit of logic within your code, it might be easier to use an if statement. So you can also update and do even more. So if I had a variable and HTML output or something like that, and let's just set this one to be blank right now. I could also update my HTML output. I can shorten this. And then this one, I could always do at the end, because now I know that I've got one value for my HTML output, and I can simply output it there. So I can really simplify what's happening here. And then just concatenate together, add that in, save that. And we'll clean this one up as well, so we don't need all of this here at the end. Don't forget the quotes. So it gives us an option to do even more. So we're taking some type of action, we're updating this. We can even ask even another prompt in here. So welcome, it was true. And maybe over here, we've got another prompt. And we'll just ask them their level, or maybe we'll ask them their age. And do variable age. And then over here, we can apply something else to happen as well. So we can take the value of age that we're setting in here and make use of it within our HTML. So let's set a ternary operator in here, and we're going to check to see if. So we'll do HTML output. So we're going to add to the HTML output. So we'll add some additional context to that. And this is where we're going to use age, and we're going to use a ternary operator for this one. So we've got a combination of both. So we're going to check to see if age is greater than 18, and if it is, then we're going to add you are over 18, and otherwise we're going to say you are under 18. So now let's try this out. So we're going to get one prompt asking us for our name, and if our name is within the usernames, then we can run through the logic here and output ask the age, and then check to see what their age is, update that into the HTML output, and then we can see that within our inner HTML. So let's save this and go back out here. So we need to be within the array. So if we just type in something that's not in the array, we see that denied was not true. And we're not even going to bother with the age because we know the person is not in the array. So next, let's see if the person is in the array. We output hello, and now we're asking their age. So I'm going to say 19, and then welcome, it was true, you are over 18, John. So this is a great way to do a combination between the two. And really, programming is all about creating that set of instructions for the application to run through. And this is where logic is really, really important, because it gives us the ability to set different paths and run different pieces of code depending on what values we've got and what are met or are not met. So what I want you to do now is take what you've learned and try it out for yourself. Create your own, a separate file, create an array of users and their names, ask them about what their name is, check to see if that user is in the array, And if they are, then run some code, create some variables, and create an interesting output to be returned back to the user. And in the next lesson, we're going to explore even more with what we can do with if statements.